In this episode, I'm going to implement API versioning. So, what is API versioning? API versioning is the practice of transparently managing changes to your API. Okay, that means if we need to implement some breaking changes, we want to make sure that we do not do anything that will cause our API consumers or customers to change their code or to break their code. So, what are those breaking changes? Well, here I have few of them. Renaming fields, properties or resource URLs, changing in the payload structure. So if you make any changes on your payload structure, which is the request parameters, like request object, that will break the API. And if you modify response codes or HTTP verbs, that can also break the API, right? Redesigning API endpoints. That means if you make any changes on your route, API route URL, that can also break the API. Okay, so now let's take a look on a diagram. Let's consider we have only one API, right, which is this one. Okay, so customer 1, customer 2, customer 4, they are using API version 1, right? Let's say API. So at some point later you decided or you need to make a change which is breaking change in your business layer or in your domain, right? Then if you make that changes there, that will break. That means this API will break these existing customers. So in this scenario, if we need to implement those breaking changes in the already working API, the best way is to apply versioning to prevent breaking our API to these existing customers. Now you can introduce another API with that changes, and then you can see the customer 3 is using that API version 2. Also, then you can let other customers that we have now API version 2. You can also utilize or you can also consume that version, right? So later customers can decide whether they will update their API endpoint or not, right? So that means you can update or make any changes in your API without breaking the customers by utilizing API versioning. So that's why API versioning is an important technique for our API development. Okay, and there are so many ways to achieve this API versioning. I will go over few of them in this episode. Okay, so let's go to the code. First of all, I would like to add NuGet package in the API project. So right click on the API and select manage NuGet packages. In the browse, type versioning. Yep. Then you can see that we have API versioning, which is like asp.versioning.mbc. So this is what I'm gonna use. Okay, earlier we used to use this one, Microsoft.ASP NET Core.mbc.versioning, but this package has been deprecated. Alternative package is asp.versioning.mbc. So I'm gonna install this one, and the latest stable version is 8.1.0 at this moment. Okay, I also want to install API Explorer, this one. So this is gonna be the same version number, 8.1.0. So that's enough for our API versioning. We can confirm by looking under packages. So we can see that those are been installed already. Okay, now let's go to the service extensions. We need to create a service extension method that is gonna be public static void configure versioning. Okay, this is gonna be this API service collection services, and we do not need this configuration, so we can remove that. Okay, then what else? I think that's enough in the parameter. So services dot add API versioning option okay, so in the option we want to add option dot report API version equal true, and then option dot assume default version when unspecified equal true. So that means if customer doesn't specify the version, then it will assume the default version. So what would be that default version? We need to define it here. The default version is gonna be new API version, and let's say that is gonna be 1.0. Okay, we can remove that and add the using a statement. Okay, that's good for now. Now let's call it from the program.cs file. So it's gonna be we can use after controller, right? Builders dot services dot configure API configure versioning. That's it. So this is how we can register the extension method. Okay, now let's go to our controller. So in the controller we do not have anything here at this moment. Now let's give it a try. Okay, so I'm sending this request get all products. Okay, I get back the response, and header it doesn't say anything about the API version, but we got the response. Okay, so how do we know that it is coming from the API version 1, right? So for that we need to update the service extensions API at API Explorer. That was the second NuGet package. Options, okay, what I want to do here is group format name abstractions.group format name, and also substitute API in URL. Substitute API version in URL true. Okay, as soon as I add this in the API Explorer, now let's run it again. Okay, send the request. Now if you see, we got the response back. Also in the header it says API supported versions 1.1, because that was the default version we specified here. If you see, this is the default version we specified here. Okay, also we can also specify this is the API version. So API version is gonna be 1.0, right? Send the request and got back the response. Let's say this is API version 2.0. What would be the response there? Okay, send the request, bad request. Okay, API found, but it was a bad request because the default version is 1.0, but that 1.0 API version is not available in our API, right? Hence it couldn't find the API version 1, that's why it is a bad request. Okay, so what we can do, we can keep it API version 1.0, then we can create another API for the product controller. Let's say, let's create a folder, give it a name B2, right? Under B2, just copy this product controller and paste it there. Okay, I want to make this as version 2, and this is complaining that we have the same definition as product controller, so we need to change the namespace. This is actually under B2. Okay, now we have the product controller, that is API version 2. Okay, now if we run it, and then send the request again, we can see that API supported versions are 1.0 and 2.0. We have now two API versions, right? But the response is coming from API version 1. How can we make sure that? Okay, let's put a breakpoint here. This is the API version 2 and this is API version 1, right? Then hit the request again. If you see, it is coming to the API version 1, right? Not the API version 2. All right. So far we did not make any URL change here, right? In the API version 1 and API version 2, right? So how can the customer can call the product API version 2? Well, we can either change a new route for the new customers. We can give them like API slash the version B is gonna be API version here, right? Then slash controller. If we give them this URL, this route, this is gonna be a new URL for this API. So we are giving a new URL for the version 2. Okay, so how can we create that API version 2? Let's create a folder here, and that is for version 2, right? And add a request get all products, right? And I want to use the same URL, but I want to make sure that it gets B2. Okay, how do you know that? If you see API slash B and the version number is 2, right? And then slash controller name. So that's why this is API B2 product. Okay, send the request. Okay, we have to run the application first. Okay, oops, what happened? Okay, we got the response. Send the request again. Now if you see, now the request came into the API version 2, right, with the request parameter. So this is gonna be the new URL for the version 2, right? But if we send like B1, it's not gonna work. Bad request, that API is not available, right? So this is only for B2. So this is one of the way you can modify the request, I mean URL for the version 2, right? If we don't want to use the version number in the URL, we can also achieve the same versioning, but we need to provide that version number either through the parameter or the headers, right? So somewhere we have to specify the version number, otherwise there is no way to know from the API side which API version is looking for, right? So let's say I want to keep the same URL, but I want to pass as part of the parameter. So it's gonna be API version, provide the version number which is 2.0. Okay, how can we achieve that? So to achieve that, let's go to service extensions. Okay, so here we have to specify that option dot API version reader equal to new query string API version reader. Okay, and that is gonna be API dash version, right? So it will read that API dash version from the query string, then it will map to that a specific version. Okay, so now let's go to the product controller, remove this, or let's create one more here. Right, so we added that API version reader from query string. Okay, now let's go to here. We have now API dash version, right? This is something they are looking for. Then if we send the request, we do not have that B2 in the URL. Send the request. Okay, now you see the request came into the version 2, right? We also got the request parameter here. Okay, so continue. So we got the response. Now we can also use headers, right? Instead of passing through API version param, we can also pass that using headers. So what we can do, API dash the version, and version is gonna be 2.0, right? So I did uncheck here. If I did check, it will include in the query string. If I do uncheck, it is not gonna add that param with the request, right? Or you can delete that from here. Now I'm gonna add API version in the headers. So I have that is in the headers, right? If I add in the headers, it will not show up in the URL, but it will go as part of the headers with the request. Okay, now if we send, it cannot detect. Well, so what it would do, we did not provide through the URL, right? So it will go into the version 1 because we still did not implement that for the headers. So if I send the request, if you see that it is going to the default, which is v1 version 1, right? So this is coming from the version 1. So what we need to do, we need to make the changes here. Now I want to add this for header API version reader. So it will read that API version from the headers. Let's implement. Let's run it here. So I'm passing API version through headers. Send the request. Now if you see, it is coming to the API version 2. Let's confirm it again by calling that API send. Yep. So it is coming to the API version 2, right? So either you can implement this header API version reader or query string API version reader. Now let's say you want to give both options to the customer, right? Then how can we achieve that? Well, in that case, we have to use API version reader equal API version reader dot combine. Okay, in the combine we can provide that query API version reader, which is API dash version, right? And another one is from header. You can keep the same name, or you can also make change that. So I'm keeping the same param name or header name, right? So now we have both of them, so they can use any one of them, right? Either they can use query string or they can use header. Okay, so that's why I did combine both of them here for the API version reader. Now let's consider an example, right? Let's say get product by ID, right? So it is going to the service layer and then it is returning the product. Okay, let's see how it look like. Let's take this up. Also from here, right, instead put a breakpoint in the get product. This is version 2 for version 1 here. Okay, so what we want to do here, so this is without versioning anything here, right? If we send, it is going to the version 1 and it will return no content, right? Now in the version 2, let's create request get product by ID. Here I'm gonna pass this URL, right? But I wanna mention API version equal 2.0. I wanna get, okay, now if you see, it is going to the API version 2. So it is returning 204, no content, right? It is same, yeah. So with our new requirement as part of the version 2, we want to return like not found, right? So how can we achieve that? Well, let's go back here. From here we can pass let's say the version number, right? We can pass the version number or something, let's say 2, right? If we add that, maybe we can use here version number is 2. Let's add this version number, add that in the definition. So I added that in the definition. Let's go to the implementation. Oops, it doesn't go directly. I have to, okay, I have to add it here in version number. It is by default, it is null, right? Because we are not passing that from the API version 1, right? So this is nullable. Okay, we have to use nullable integer, right? So there is no breaking change here at this moment. So what we can do, if version number is not null, right? We can say not equal null, right? And version number is greater than 1, right? Then oops, return this error message. Otherwise don't return not found exceptions. Okay, now if we test it again, so this is using API. Let's add the API version number here so that we can easily look into API version 1 send. Okay, it is coming to the API version 1, right? Calling the API, return 204. Okay, let's go to the version 2.0. If we send, it's coming in here, right? 404. Okay, so this was a breaking change. Let's consider this was a breaking change in our API. That's why we introduced API version 2, right? So that the existing customer can still continue using the API, right? No content, they are still getting that, but the new customers, they are going to use this 404 not found response, right? So we made the response change, and then we can let the customers, the existing customers, right, who are using the version 1, that we have now API version 2, and this is the URL, or this is the way how you can call the API, right? Then they can also change on their side, that they can integrate with 404, right? So this is one of the like use case where we can utilize the API versioning. Let's do one thing. I wanna bring that back, the version in the URL, so that the user is not gonna make any mistake, because by looking the URL they can easily figure out that that user is using the version 1 or 2, right? So that's why I want to use API v2/product. So now they know that they are using version 2.0, right? So in that case we do not even need this one, right? Send that, we got the response because we have the URL change here, right? That is directly going to that API. Okay, and for the version 1, right, we do not need to use this API version number, right? They can still continue using the existing API endpoint, and that is returning 204, no content. Even though we made a breaking change in our API side, still the existing customer can continue consuming that API, right? At some point later, you decided that you want to deprecate the version 1. So how can we deprecate the version 1? Well, in the API version, we can specify that deprecated equal true. Okay, now we are going to let the user know that this API is deprecated. Okay, if we see, we have the API supported versions 1.0 and 2.0. After adding this deprecated true, let's see how it look like. Okay, now send a request again. If we come into the headers, you see supported versions is only 2.0 and deprecated versions 1.0. So that means going forward this API 1.0 is deprecated, right? So this is another way to let user know that this version is deprecated. Okay, and it is very easy to implement. Only need to specify this property here, deprecated equal true. Okay, so here we have learned 3 ways to implement the versioning. One is using URL change, which is the routing change, right? And then second one was using parameter, right? We can include in the parameter. Also the third one is the headers. We can also include as part of the headers API dash version. So these 3 ways we can implement the API versioning. I hope this makes sense to you. If you still have any confusion or anything, please let me know in the comment box. I will try to explain you through the comment box. In the next episode, I am gonna implement caching. I hope this was helpful to you. Please guys, if you like this tutorial and want to get more tutorials, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Also turn on the notification so that as soon as I post a video, you would get a notification. Thank you. See you in the next episode.